Well, hello, welcome again after quite a long break, and we're back with a new travel tale. Although it's not new, I've delved back into my memory and written up travel fragments from a bygone age about when I went hitchhiking across Europe, and it was in 1968 when I was 20 years old. So you know in the films when they go back into time, they have this music. We're travelling back into the swinging 60s. And so are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. In the swinging 60s, when I was 20, I thought nothing of sticking my thumb out in front of a passing lorry for a lift to who knows where. And so it was that I set out with my college friend, Adrian, to hitch from London to Greece. I did not keep a daily diary of our adventures while it was happening, but now, half a century later, I share my recollections of that summer sojourn in 1968. My mother waved me off from our council flat in Watford, in Hertfordshire, which is just north of London. She was smiling, but I was puzzled by the tears flowing down her cheeks. Why on earth would she be worried? I naively wondered. After all, I was only setting off to hitch rides with unknown people in unknown vehicles all the way to Greece. What could be her problem? My rucksack contained a secret weapon for the journey, packets of colourful paper knickers. They were surprisingly comfortable and could simply be thrown away at the end of the day. They were all the rage for a while. My other secret weapon was Adrian, my student friend, who had asked me to go with him to Greece to see Agamemnon's tomb, as you do. He was invaluable for protection purposes, or so I thought, despite his admittedly non-threatening presence. Adrian was quite a cerebral and pleasant being, with a smiley face and cascades of chestnut brown hair, worn long as was the fashion. I would stand on the road with my rucksack, thumb out, hitching a ride, while Adrian would hide in the bushes. When a vehicle screeched to a halt to give this flame-haired young beauty a ride, Adrian would whip out from said bushes and hurtle into the car with me. We tramped along the road south out of Cologne and stuck our thumbs out. We had strayed on to the German Autobahn and were now in danger of being arrested as we illegally walked along the hard shoulder. Just as a police helicopter circled overhead, a powerful grey Audi pulled up behind us and the driver called, in impeccable English, "Quick, get into the car or you will be in trouble with the traffic police." We threw our rucksacks in the car and jumped in. This German businessman smoothly accelerated away, and I had never been in such a luxurious car before. We didn't even have a car when I was young. Kurt wore a smart grey suit and dark blue silk tie. His brown hair was neatly cut. We, by contrast, wore jeans and sandals. Our feet were dusty and our hair windswept. His luxurious Audi streaked along the autobahn at an alarming speed, but the car was smooth and quiet. I began to relax, as it seemed we were not expected to converse. He dropped us off finally at the spa town of Baden Baden. We were now in the Black Forest area of southwest Germany, and I was just remarking that D.H. Lawrence had once lived here when an almighty thunderstorm suddenly began with a knee-knocking clap of thunder above us. No longer insulated from the elements in the luxury car, we were almost instantly soaked to the skin and took refuge in a pine wood. From here we watched forked lightning of more intensity than I had ever seen in England. I dimly recalled the inadvisability of sheltering under trees in a thunderstorm, but such is the life of a hitchhiker. Indeed, we got used to getting wet and getting dry by subsequent sunshine in the same clothes as we travelled the roads and byways. And ironically, Baden-Baden is known for its mild climate and hot springs, but not that day. The outdoor life seems to immerse you into the flow of the changes in weather, the changing landscapes as you travel on. And it's like developing a primitive, organic connection with time and space, with the land and the sky, because you're out in the air so much. You're almost like an animal linked to the earth and the seasons. Instead of complaining, you almost relish the rain and the wind, the sun and the dust on your feet. We swung our damp rucksacks onto our backs and began walking to the road going west out of town, with our thumbs out to hitch a lift. After no luck, we again employed our fiendish strategy. Adrian decided to hide behind a bush and leave me looking like a young woman on her own. It was not long before a massive articulated lorry slowed down and pulled in ahead of us, with much creaking and squeaking of brakes, culminating in a great hiss. I ran and climbed up the huge steps into the cabin, throwing my rucksack in ahead of me. The driver seized hold of it and threw it in the back. He turned out to be Eric with an H, an Austrian with a buzz cut of bristled greying hair and a lined, lived-in face. He smelled strongly of cigarette smoke, an impression confirmed by a line of cigarette packets propped along the dashboard against the giant windscreen. Eric was a little taken aback when seconds later Adrian also clambered into the cabin. There was enough room for 3 in the front seats, and we set off again, with the hissing and creaking of the great vehicle in our ears. Foolishly, I was sitting in the middle next to Eric. We had very little conversation due to a language barrier, and Adrian soon fell asleep, his tousled head lolling against the vibrating window. Adrian's presence counted for little with Eric, as he started to stroke my auburn locks under the pretence of admiring my hair. His rather grubby fat fingers began to stray onto my thighs. I moved his hand back to the steering wheel, to his amusement, and then he began his explorations again. The journey proceeded with me wrestling and resisting this gruffly chuckling Austrian octopus. It seemed that we had been travelling south, and for 4 hours, and later Eric dropped us off in Geneva in Switzerland. We tumbled out of the lorry, and it went on its huffing and puffing way. We stood in the evening air, looking round, trying to get our bearings. There seemed to be a lot of shops selling 4711 cologne, so I got some for my mother. It's a tribute to my sturdy rucksack that the glass bottle was still unbroken when I got home some weeks later, but I must say that all my clothes smelled of the 4711. We found our way to a youth hostel, and we were actually using physical folding maps in the 1960s. Lights out after a quick bag of chips, for such is the habitual diet of the hitchhiker. We felt lucky the next morning to hitch a lift with two dark-haired Italian men in their 20s in a sporty little number, which I believe was a white Alfa Romeo. They took us through the German Stilfser Joch Pass, an alpine pass of over 9,000 feet, and through the Italian Giogo dello Stelvio Pass. This was at the northwest base of the Ortles mountain range in northern Italy near the Swiss border. It was a truly horrifying ride, as we discovered the driver to be a budding Lewis Hamilton. Taking the steep, hairpin bends at such alarming speeds, we could hear the tyres screeching. We were extremely frightened, but they were elated and animated. After the first look out of the window, when I could only see a sheer drop over the side of the mountain, feet away from us and hundreds of feet down, I shut my eyes for most of the trip. Had I been religious, I would have been making the sign of the cross. Fabio and Gianni were fashion students in Milan, and they took us all the way there, laughing and singing, nearly crashing over the steep mountain roads, skidding and squealing brakes through these stunning mountain passes, and being exceptionally cordial to us as they barely spared our lives. Perhaps now, as I stood in the big square, gazing at the impressive Cathedral of Milan, my hands still slightly shaking, I had an inkling of why my mother had been crying as she waved me off. Milan Cathedral took 6 centuries to build, and it's said to be the 3rd largest in the world. There is a sense of awe as you feel like a tiny dot looking up at 350 feet of Gothic architecture, festooned with tiny spires, below the central one, which seems to travel upwards to heaven, judiciously reminding you that you should be living as if aiming for eternity in heaven above. After a night in a hostel, we were back on the road again. But rather than travelling south as planned, we accepted a lift with a man in a white van who was going to Venice to deliver a van load of aromatic sausages to a shop there. These stacks of red and pink sausages were about a foot long and covered in little net-like skins. In fact, Giovanni referred to them as salamis, for so they were, packed 10 abreast and 5 deep in wooden slatted boxes, through which they were making their garlic and musk-scented presents known to us. We passed through the beautiful city of Verona on the way and stopped briefly, where our driver delivered some of his produce. I was deeply impressed by the 1st century Roman amphitheatre there, which now houses grand opera performances in the starry open air. Giovanni was born and bred in Verona, and so proud of his city. He took us to a 14th century balcony, said to be the setting of Romeo and Juliet's famous scene, before setting off again for Venice. How could I know that 30 years later, in my 50s, I would return to Verona as part of an official public health delegation and be led down a red carpet to the VIP seats in that majestic amphitheatre to be treated to an operatic performance in the warm Italian evening air. Our delegation had been met at the airport and escorted into the city by a group of 6 white-gloved policemen on motorbikes to attend a grand reception. Here, full Parmesan cheeses were attended by chefs in tall white hats, waiting to serve us with many delicacies. How life surprises. But back to our hitchhiking time as impoverished students. By the time Giovanni dropped us in Venice, just off St. Mark's Square, we felt like a couple of smoked salamis ourselves, as we had been marinated in their fumes. We dodged into a backstreet cafe, avoiding the cafes in the main square due to our meagre budget. And that's episode 1 of the Swinging Sixties Hitchhiking Adventure. And tomorrow we'll go on with what happened in Venice. Okay, so it's lovely to see you, whether you're joining me live or perhaps on catch up. And do join me tomorrow for the next episode. Take care. See you later.